Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced new sanctions on Iran-based al-Qaeda leaders just days before the Trump administration leaves office. In his statement, he accused Iran of having links to al-Qaeda, but did not provide any evidence. Let's listen.
I would say Iran is indeed the new Afghanistan as the key geographic hub for al-Qaeda. But it's actually worse. Unlike in Afghanistan, when al-Qaeda was hiding in the mountains, al-Qaeda today is operating underneath the hard shell of the Iranian regime's protection.
Iran has already dismissed Pompeo's claims, calling them lies, escalating an already tense situation between Washington and Tehran. Meanwhile, aid groups in Yemen are sounding the alarm, claiming the Trump administration did little to ensure it would not be impacted by the terrorist designation of Houthi rebels earlier this week. Now, non-government organizations on the ground fear food and medical shipments could be stopped as a result, turning an already critical situation in Yemen into a dire one. CBS News reporter Haley Ott joins us now from London with more. Hi, Haley. Great to see you. Give us a sense of what is happening on the ground in Yemen. What does this humanitarian crisis look like, and how has it progressed over the last 5 years?
So when we hear people talk about Yemen, they often refer to it as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. And that designation really started in 2018, when international organizations sounded the alarm about a very severe impending famine. The country was on the brink of economic collapse, and aid organizations were running out of funding. So because of that alarm, they were actually able to raise funding to continue sort of functioning on the ground in 2018. And in 2019, things stabilized. They weren't good, but they were okay on the ground, or they were stable at the very least. Then comes 2020 and a global coronavirus pandemic. Food insecurity already existed in Yemen, and funding started to run out for the humanitarian organizations that were on the ground there, and the economy started to face problems again. And now these groups are saying, and they said at the end of 2020, that the situation in Yemen was as bad as it has ever been before. This new designation, putting the Houthis on the terrorist list, is for these humanitarian organizations really a worst case scenario in terms of their work on the ground.
And speaking of many of those humanitarian groups, they are responding to Pompeo's designation, saying that this move will seriously impact their efforts. Explain how that works. What does this designation mean for those groups that are, apolitical, simply trying to get in there with aid?
So when you hear about a list like being put on a terror list, this group, the Houthis, there's a violent conflict going on, you assume that that will impact just this group and that everybody else will be able to continue doing their jobs. Really, many people are saying that actually putting the Houthis on this list won't necessarily impact them that much. They don't get a lot of money via the United States. They're supported by Iran. Who it will impact are these humanitarian organizations, like the World Food Program, that supports a huge number of people on the ground in Yemen. And that's because 80% of Yemen's population lives in Houthi-controlled territory. The capital city is in Houthi-controlled territory. The main port is in Houthi-controlled territory. And Yemen gets 90% of its food imported. So the organizations on the ground in Yemen are dealing with local transport businesses. They're dealing with local vendors. All of these companies have insurance that they need. And so the line between the humanitarian organization and local sort of operations within Houthi territory is blurred. None of these organizations operate in a vacuum. So they say even if international organizations or nonprofits get special licenses, special dispensation to act on the ground in Yemen because they operate in tandem with all of these local groups, they will still be severely impacted.
So, Haley, what will happen next in Yemen? I mean, we did hear Pompeo, Secretary of State Pompeo, say he was going to take some steps to make sure this didn't happen. So far as I know, that hasn't materialized. So what will be the next steps in Yemen?
We don't know exactly what the situation is practically for these groups providing aid to Yemeni civilians at the moment. And what they're asking for right now is clarity. Any hiccup, any delay in terms of their work at this point, because the situation is so dire, literally means food not on the table for Yemeni people that day. So they want to know as soon as possible, hopefully over the coming days, what exactly the practical steps will be so that they continue to do their work. They can continue to do their work. Some groups are urgently calling for the reversal of this policy. The International Rescue Committee calls it diplomatic vandalism. And they're saying that if the Trump administration isn't going to reverse course, they're calling on the Biden administration to reverse course immediately. But they say that as long as this is in place, real urgent damage is being done to Yemeni civilians and the work of humanitarians on the ground.
All right. Well, Haley Ott, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.